My name doesn't matter anymore. Names are for ordinary lives, for women who sit at kitchen tables and wait for their husbands to return home from jobs in quiet suburban streets. I used to be one of those women, one of those daughters, sisters, neighbors, but my name was buried the night my sister died. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about finding strength when you need it most. Now, I am only the voice of what happened, the living witness of a silence that America refused to acknowledge. Childhood in Sacramento was not the cinematic dream people imagine when they think of California. We lived on the lesser side of town, where peeling paint curled off houses like dead skin and streetlights flickered with the kind of uncertainty that made you walk faster after dark. My parents, immigrants who arrived in the late 80s, worked themselves into exhaustion. My father was a mechanic, hands calloused, face always shiny with sweat. My mother stitched clothing in a garment shop downtown, endless hours bending needle and thread to keep strangers dressed. We weren't poor, but we weren't respected either. To people on the outside, we were the sort of family whose name blended into every form, whose lives decorated working-class statistics without ever reaching headlines. But within the little yellow house where we lived, something else brewed. My parents' pride shined brightest in my older brother Daniel. He carried the family's expectations like a crown, smart, athletic, the first to attend a private high school on scholarship. Grace, my younger sister, arrived with an aura so bright you couldn't help but orbit her energy. She spoke loud, laughed louder, and no rule could ever contain her. And me? I was the middle child. The quiet one. The one who slipped into corners, lost in books, sketching in cheap journals because words made more sense than noise. Maybe that silence was dismissive, maybe it was armor. My family loved me, yes, but I was never the favorite. Not like Daniel. Not like Grace. Yet sometimes being unseen prepares you for when you must become invisible. By 19, I was certain Sacramento would suffocate me if I didn't leave. College gave me the chance. I studied literature, words were the only constant companions I trusted. My part-time job at a bookstore paid just enough to get me by, though the scent of old paper always left me with migraines after late shifts. It was at a university mixer I first saw James Carter. He didn't belong there, not really. He was already working at his father's investment firm, but he must have enjoyed being worshipped among impressionable students who knew his family name. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark suit, his presence had the noise of command. Women circled him, but his attention drifted to me, the quiet girl at the edge of the room, drinking flat soda from a plastic cup. "You don't belong here," he had said, sliding next to me with that predatory smile. My cheeks burned. "Neither do you." That was the first time I saw him laugh, sharp, amused, as if no one ever dared talk back to him. Sometimes I wonder if that moment sealed my fate. James Carter began with flowers, dinners, promises. He was the kind of man girls told themselves they didn't deserve, because everything about him looked like wealth, security, and future. And I was naive enough to believe him. When he proposed 2 years later, my parents were astonished, my neighbors envious. I had captured a Carter, one of those Carters, the family with sprawling properties, luxury cars, their name engraved in local philanthropy boards. I should have run the first time I set foot in their estate. The Carter family home was not a house, it was a declaration. White columns, sprawling lawn, a chandelier heavy enough to crush a man if it fell. Their dinners were rituals of wealth, where polished silver clinked on porcelain and every word was measured currency. James's mother, Evelyn Carter, was the queen at the table, her presence stitched with arrogance. She never addressed me directly but always worked me into conversations with surgical precision. "So," Evelyn would purr, eyes sliding over me without affection, "where did you say your mother works?" "A factory, wasn't it?" She would smile afterward, tight-lipped, sharp enough to bleed. James would chuckle beside me, sipping his bourbon, as if her cruelty was just seasonal weather in the Carter climate. His father, Richard Carter, stayed silent, though his disapproving glances said enough: I didn't belong. But James's arms were warm in those early months, and I convinced myself it was worth enduring the sting of their contempt. The mask of his tenderness slipped gradually. At first, it was impatience, the sharp sigh when I timidly expressed an opinion at dinner parties, the way he silenced me with a hand at my knee. Then, it was nights he didn't come home. Perfume lingered on his shirts, notes tucked in pockets from women whose names I never wanted to know. When I asked, his laughter was cruel. Men need distraction. You should be grateful you're my wife and not a mistress. The first slap came after I threw one of those notes away. His palm landed with such force I stumbled, the taste of iron blooming in my mouth. He told me never to question him again. Something in me cracked that day, but I pressed it down. I had nowhere else to go. Divorces in families like theirs weren't simple, they were wars of reputation. And I wasn't yet brave enough to become an enemy. But Grace noticed. She always noticed. My sister was the one light that pierced the suffocating Carter mansion. She was 21 when she began visiting on weekends, bringing laughter and rebellion into halls lined with portraits of stern Carter ancestors. James hated her, called her trouble. Evelyn sneered at her clothing, her noise, her presence. But I breathed more freely when she was around, and Grace often whispered at night, "One day, we're getting you out of here, and he won't touch you again." I clung to her words like lifeboats. But lifeboats sink too. It was September when the night came that would hollow me out forever. The Carters had hosted one of their grand gatherings, a charity masquerading as a social ladder. James drank too much, I could tell by the wild shine in his eyes as guests drifted out. Grace was in the kitchen with me, helping stack wine glasses. She hummed, off-key, teasing me about being too serious. I remember laughing, it felt foreign, like remembering a language you almost forgot. The door slammed behind us. James stumbled in, tie undone, eyes storming. "What the hell are you doing here again?" he spat at Grace. "Visiting my sister," she snapped without hesitation, fearless even in front of his rage. "You're poison," he barked. "She doesn't need your voice filling her head." Grace stepped closer. "The only poison here is you." The argument rose sharp, words colliding like knives. And then, James shoved her. It didn't even look violent in the moment, just a single push with his heavy arm. But she fell, oh God, she fell, backward against the polished marble floor of the Carter estate. The sound was sickening, her skull struck stone like a dropped jar. The silence afterward was grotesque. I screamed. I dropped to my knees, pressing her blood-warmed hair, begging her, pleading her name. James lit a cigarette. He smoked. He watched as if she had spilled wine at dinner. Grace's chest didn't rise again. She was gone before I could whisper the last words that might have reached her. That moment split my life into before and after. The Carters handled everything with practiced efficiency. The story they spread, Grace tripped. She was clumsy, careless. An unfortunate accident. Police officers spoke to me like I was hysterical, unstable, still processing grief. James's mother folded her arms during questioning, her silence weightier than any denial. And just like that, the system closed its doors. Grace was buried under lies, her laughter silenced forever. That night, I washed her blood from my hands and swore I would never forgive them. I would not forgive James. I would not forgive Evelyn. I would not forgive any of them who sat at that dinner table whilst my sister's body was lowered into the earth. I swore vengeance with the same devotion some people swear faith. But vengeance requires patience. And silence. and the ability to play weaker than you really are. So I stayed. 3 years. 3 long years in that mansion, in that marriage, in their family of murderers. I smiled when expected. I nodded when Evelyn ridiculed me. I swallowed every flame of anger until it crystallized into a weapon. Because I learned the truth, if justice is denied, then revenge becomes its closest twin. And revenge was going to be mine. Time does not soften wounds, they calcify. They become bone deep, shaping you into someone you no longer recognize. After Grace's death, my reflection changed. I saw the same dark hair, the same plain brown eyes, but behind them simmered something sharp, something patient. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a sister. I became a shadow, waiting, watching, planning. And to destroy the Carters, I had to learn how to wait. The Carters believed me broken. Evelyn would glance across the dinner table, tight smile in place, speaking to James as though I were an object. She seems quieter these days. At least she's learning her role. I played my role well. I nodded, lowered my eyes, poured wine when asked, dressed in clothes she approved. My silence became a balm to them, they mistook it for obedience, when it was the calm that storms prepare. James still drank. He still tortured me with affairs whispered through perfume and lipstick stains. He still struck me when his temper swelled beyond words. But every bruise was only kindling, every insult another nail in the coffin I was building for him. I realized something, watching them, the Carters suffered from blindness. Not physical blindness, but the blindness of arrogance. They believed themselves untouchable, protected by their wealth, their name, their influence. They never once suspected that the quiet woman at their table was sharpening silence into a knife. That blindness would destroy them. The first step toward revenge wasn't fire, it was patience. I began to watch, to listen. At first, only scraps came. Late-night arguments between Richard and Evelyn over finances. Drunken murmurs from James about debts. Michael Carter, James's younger brother, caught caressing women in corners of the house when his wife was upstairs. I wrote everything down. Every slip of information was scrawled into cheap notebooks I hid beneath the wooden floorboards of my closet. Financial records, overheard accounts, dates, names of mistresses, shady business deals James bragged about when drunk. Quietly, carefully, I also learned how to use technology. Libraries became my allies. I studied fraud cases, forensic accounting, even beginner's lessons in hacking. Knowledge became ammunition, and every day I armed myself more. The Carters thought my bookstore days were long gone, that I knew nothing of numbers, business, or danger. They had no idea the quiet widow in training was constructing a map to their downfall. It's strange how 3 years can pass in a rhythm of lies. Every morning I rose, dressed, cooked, smiled, endured. Every evening I retreated into my thoughts like a soldier drawing blueprints before battle. Sometimes, the weight almost crushed me. I dreamed of Grace often, her laughter, her rebellion, her courage. She would visit me in sleep, staring at me through pools of blood, whispering, "Do something. Don't let them bury me a second time." I promised her every night I wouldn't. By the 3rd year, my resolve was diamond. And the moment finally came to strike. Richard Carter was the root of their wealth, the patriarch nestled firmly in his false empire. His company, Carter Investments Incorporated, framed itself as legitimate, but I knew better. I had overheard enough drunken conversations between him and James to realize their side ventures skirted legality. Shell companies. Tax evasion. Bribes. Things whispered with arrogance, because who would dare challenge them? Me. I spent months gathering documents from James's study. He was careless when drunk, papers scattered, USB drives left unattended. I copied files when I could, photographed ledgers with my phone, memorized passwords he boasted carelessly about. It was dangerous. The house had cameras in certain wings, and Evelyn's eyes were sharper than any lens. But they underestimated me. I orchestrated every move carefully, never rushing, never greedy in what I stole. The moment I had enough, I mailed copies of everything to the IRS from an anonymous source. Not in one package, but in intervals, like drops of acid eating away at stone. I knew they wouldn't fall instantly. I had to strike hard enough to spark suspicion, soft enough to keep them wondering who fed information. 2 months later, the fire began. Federal agents walked into Carter Investments Incorporated offices swarmed. Boxes of documents seized. Accounts frozen. Employees whispered of corruption. At the Carter estate, chaos trembled under gold chandeliers. Richard raged, Evelyn paled, James shouted about leaks. For the first time, their arrogance cracked. I watched silently, pouring wine at dinner, as headlights of government cars swept across our marble driveway. Inside, my chest hummed with Grace's laughter. But I wasn't finished. Richard's empire was only the trunk. I wanted every rotten branch broken. Michael Carter, James's brother, was easy prey. Known publicly as the responsible one, he sat on city councils, vast boards, adored for his charitable persona. But I had evidence, dozens of photographs of his affairs, records of hotel stays when he claimed to be on business trips. One by one, I began sending evidence to media outlets, his wife, and political opponents. The scandal erupted like wildfire. Newspapers plastered his face, accusations piling higher by the day. His wife filed for divorce and took custody of his children. His carefully constructed career collapsed until his once prestigious name became murky gossip. The Carters panicked. But I was still invisible to them. They ranted about enemies, jealous rivals, mysterious betrayers. They never once turned to the silent woman who smiled across their dinner table. Evelyn began to unravel next. Watching her son's empires crumble drained her. I saw her step into rooms with darkened eyes, sipping brandy with trembling hands, whispering to Richard late at night when she thought I was asleep. I nearly pitied her. Nearly. But then I remembered her expression the night Grace died. That smug, collected look as police dismissed my voice. No, pity had no place here. I didn't destroy Evelyn with papers or affairs. I played a different game, whispers. At lavish parties she still hosted to cling to status, I drifted into conversations with her society friends, planting subtle truths twisted into rumors. That Evelyn knew about Richard's fraud. That she had paid off officials. That she orchestrated cover-ups. Rumors are delicate but effective. Within months, invitations declined. Whispers sharpened. Social doors that had always swung wide for Evelyn slammed closed. Perhaps not as devastating as IRS agents or media scandals, but humiliation hurts in ways deeper than prison. And humiliation was exactly what Evelyn had once tried to craft for me. James, of course, remained the greatest target. My sister's killer. My abuser. My jailer. His empire had always relied on two things, his reputation as his father's heir, and his ability to instill fear. Slowly, both began to slip. The company was dissolving. His family image was soiled. His mother's name whispered like poison, his brother's face ridiculed in headlines. And James. James was losing control. He drank more than ever. Nights became violent storms, screams, shattered glass, bruises on my arms. But I let him rage, because his destruction tasted closer every day. I collected proof of his abuse, photographs of bruises, recordings of screams, notes from hospital visits where I lied about falls. I also gathered evidence of his gambling debts, secret credit cards, envelopes of threats from bookies he tried to ignore. Piece by piece, I built a dossier large enough to bury him in every possible court of opinion. Yet I hesitated to send it immediately. Not because of fear, no. Because the sweetest revenge required timing. I wanted him alone, stripped of power, with no rescues left from his proud family. Only then would the truth of his monster come crawling into the light. By the end of the 3rd year, the Carter estate looked different. Not physically, the chandeliers still hung, the lawn still manicured, but it echoed with ruin. Money leaked. Friends distanced. Power crumbled. I walked through their house every day, smiling, serving, pretending, yet inside I savored every sigh, every argument, every sign of collapse. Sometimes I wondered if Grace could see me. And if she did, whether she approved. I told myself she did. One night, James stumbled home drunk, smashing a vase against the wall, cursing his father's failed lawyers and his mother's disgrace. I watched him collapse in the chair, cigarette trembling in his fingers, sweat dripping from his forehead. I walked up to him calmly, something I had never dared before. I leaned close, pressing my lips near his ear. And I whispered, "This is only the beginning." He blinked in confusion, laughter bubbling through haze. "What? What did you say?" I stood straighter, met his eyes with all the fury I had caged. "Every fall, every scandal, every ruin, you owe it to me. To Grace. I am the ghost in your walls. And I am not done yet." For the first time, James's face lost its certainty. He stared at me as though he were finally seeing me, not the obedient wife, not the silent shadow. Me. And I smiled. From that night onward, paranoia ate him alive. He searched my things, yelled at staff, screamed at his mother, even accused his own father. He tore pages from books thinking they held secrets, smashed phones, demanded names of who betrayed him. But the genius of revenge lies in the quiet. You give them enough to doubt everyone, yet keep yourself unsuspicious. I returned to silence during the day, soft-spoken, bruised when he struck. He began second-guessing himself. By making him think I might be his enemy, then acting like the helpless wife again, I turned his own mind into a battlefield. Still, the end hadn't arrived yet. James deserved more than ruin. He deserved despair. He deserved to know he was powerless before Grace's ghost and mine. So I waited, watching him spiral deeper. His debts grew. His temper worsened. The Carter family became front-page scandal after scandal, drowning under federal charges and divorces. And one evening, when his world had shrunk to nothing more than whiskey glasses and unpaid bills, I looked at him and knew the moment was near. Because revenge is sweeter when served last. Silence is a strange thing. It can comfort, or it can kill. After years in the Carter mansion, I learned silence was my sharpest weapon. In silence, I plotted. In silence, I waited. And in silence, James Carter destroyed himself. But not without a little help. By the time a fourth autumn passed after Grace's death, James was unrecognizable. He had once been the confident heir to a dynasty, arrogant and commanding. Now, the man who walked the marble floors was a fragment, sweaty, paranoid, screaming at shadows that weren't there. He stumbled through rooms muttering about betrayal, accusing his mother, his father, even the staff. He hid whiskey bottles in desk drawers, bathrooms, even in closets where our coats hung. When he did sleep, he lurched awake in cold sweats. I knew why. Because each time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Grace. The sister whose skull cracked on his mansion floor. I fueled his unraveling. Small manipulations here, subtle triggers there. I moved files he thought he misplaced. I whispered things half-heard at night. "She's not gone," I would murmur as he stirred. Or, "You'll pay soon." Was it cruel? Perhaps. But cruelty was the only language James ever taught me. While James rotted inside the wreck of his ego, I finished my preparations. The dossier I'd built over years, photos of my bruises, recordings of his drunken rages, financial proof of his debts and fraud, lists of women he assaulted, was finally complete. I made copies, sealed them carefully in envelopes, addressed to newspapers, women's advocacy groups, and federal authorities. Their delivery was timed, staggered through anonymous mail drops. James had thought alcohol was his worst poison. No, the truth was. And I had been brewing it for 3 years. Evelyn Carter clung to denial far longer than Richard did. When federal cases stripped the company, when Michael was splattered across scandal sheets, when James staggered between drunken rages, she still hosted lunches, still wore pearls, still pretended her kingdom wasn't ash. But then the calls began. Journalists knocking on doors. Tabloids running headlines, the monster heir. Photographs of my bruised arm across glossy paper. Quotes from recordings of James's rages leaked in waves. Her world collapsed with every headline. I watched her one morning across the breakfast table. She stared at the newspaper, lips silent, eyes vacant. For once, she didn't look like a queen. She looked like a woman mourning a life she couldn't resurrect. Grace would have laughed. Richard, the patriarch, sank quietly. Unlike Evelyn, he didn't rage or deny. He poured himself whiskey after whiskey and stayed in his study for hours, a monument of fallen pride. One night, I passed his open door. He was sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. For a moment, I saw not a titan, not a tyrant, but an old man realizing every empire eventually crumbles. Did I pity him? No. He had been there the night Grace died. He had endorsed silence with his silence. His hands might not have pushed her, but his power buried her with lies. And so he sat in ruin, and I passed him by. The moment finally came on a storm-soaked night. Rain clawed at the Carter windows, thunder rumbling in skies that seemed to echo Grace's rage. James staggered into her bedroom, eyes wild, hair unkempt. He reeked of whiskey and cigarettes. In his hand was a folder, a thin attempt at evidence, documents he thought incriminated me. His hands shook as he threw them onto the bed. "You," he whispered, voice cracking. "It's you. You destroyed us." I sat calmly on the edge of the bed, fingers folded. "It took you long enough to see." His face twisted in fury. "I'll kill you." I tilted my head, letting silence stretch before I spoke again. "Like you killed her?" The color drained from his already sickly face. He didn't answer, because no answer existed that could clean his hands. I stood, walked to him, and whispered close, just as I had months before. "Grace isn't gone. She lives in every headline, every collapse, every breath you take wondering what comes next. She owns you." He trembled. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of him. He was afraid of me. He sank into a chair, muttering. I left the room, and for once, I didn't look back. The envelopes landed soon after, the last wave of destruction. Newspapers ran exposés about the years of abuse, the debts, the corruption. His enemies smelled blood, and James Carter was no longer an heir, he was a headline of disgrace. Corporate investors withdrew. Former allies abandoned him. The Carter mansion emptied except for James, Evelyn, Richard, and me. Servants left, staff resigned, the once bustling halls echoing with hollow quiet. The empire was gone. And still, that wasn't enough. I wanted James to face his own end, not with my hands, but with the weight of what he had become. It happened in winter. Snow dusted the Carter estate like burial ash, muting the world outside. James didn't come downstairs that morning. Or at noon. By evening, Evelyn banged on his locked study door until Richard fetched the spare key. When the door opened, the smell hit us first, pungent, chemical, final. He lay slumped in a leather chair, eyes rolled half-closed, lips blue. Pills scattered across the desk, half-dissolved in spilled whiskey. Papers were crumpled nearby, scribbled with nonsense. In the corner, the ashtray overflowed with cigarettes smoked too quickly. And on the wall above his desk, he had carved 3 words with a knife into the wood. She was right. Evelyn screamed. Richard stared, silent as stone. And me? I stepped forward, looked at his lifeless face, and felt nothing at first. Not joy. Not sorrow. An emptiness, like waiting for an echo that doesn't come. But then Grace's laughter filled my mind, the memory of her calling him poison, of her fierce rebellion. And at last, the emptiness swelled with something sharp, something final. He was gone. The Carters tried damage control. Tried to mask his death as tragic illness. But no amount of spin could protect them anymore. Their empire was a ruin, their name a stain. Evelyn vanished from public light, Richard resigned from boards, Michael moved states away to escape shame. The mansion, once a symbol of supremacy, went on the market. Plush halls stripped, chandeliers boxed, gardens abandoned. I watched moving trucks carry away the Carters' arrogance piece by piece. In the end, their kingdom returned to dust. I left before the house sold. I had no interest in owning ruins that still reeked of Grace's blood. Now, I live in a quiet apartment downtown. Anonymous, unremarkable, ordinary. The kind of place where no one looks twice at who you are, where neighbors greet with small smiles but never inquire too deeply. It is freedom, but also exile. I am not the same woman. I can never be. Some nights, I wonder if I did the right thing. If destroying an entire family for the death of one sister makes justice, or if it makes me a monster too. The law never punished James. I became the law. And yet, when I close my eyes, I see Grace smiling at me. Not broken, not bloodied, whole. Loud, laughing, alive in memory. Maybe that is enough. Do I regret revenge? No. Every empire that falls has a story behind it. The Carters once believed their story was gold, their name untouchable. But in the end, they were dismantled by the woman they dismissed, the woman they underestimated. By the sister who refused to let Grace be buried twice. James Carter's death was not tragedy, it was consequence. Evelyn's silence, Richard's indifference, Michael's hypocrisy, all consequence. I remain. Not Grace, not the Golden Carter family. Me. The forgotten one, the quiet one, the woman who turned silence into fire. Perhaps history won't remember me. Perhaps no one will know the architect of their ruin. But I know. And Grace knows. And that is enough. Because revenge, when served, does not vanish. It lingers. It burns slow. It becomes the ashes left in the house they thought would stand forever. And I am still here, breathing.